Welcome. And for today, day 2, this is the last session, but in a way, it's also a beginning. So this topic, we're going to have 5 amazing poets. So when poets come, and they'll be here, you're not really sure what's going to happen. Are they going to write new poems? Or are they going to build on each other's poems? Or who knows, they become poemless. So I'm going to let this space emerge on its own. The topic is poetry, the Converse Anthology Collective. And I think I'm intrigued by the word collective. And I'm hearing Sudeep saying, yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, but I'm sure she has a context to it, and she has also been the spirit behind getting the specific words for each of the sessions, so I'm sure she's really put her heart and soul into this. So I'm going to invite, without further delay, Sudeep Sen, Ranjit Hoskote, and Jilam Chattaraj. And Gayatri Mazumdar from our very own Pondicherry, and a poetess. And of course, a big applause for Anu Mazumdar.
No, just do it.
So, over to this collective of poets, poems, and poetry consciousness. Thank you so much.
Do you all want to cluster in one side? Then,
yeah,
because they're not.
Come together.
Yeah, then. Yeah, come
We
this way.
sound
So then we
like
can.
classroom and there's like a teacher or a professor, but you can just come.
Thank you. Fill up the front ones. Makes us feel better.
It looks like a full house, right? Camera should never swing that side.
We want to face Anu. Then come on stage. But come up front.
So it's okay.
Come on.
Loud and clear. Okay. Okay, maybe I should just start, yeah? Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all here. So today we are doing the Converse Anthology Collective. Now, why do I say the mystery behind the collective is that about 3 years ago, right, Sudeep? No,
Yeah.
Close to 3 years ago, I suddenly get this email saying, can you please send 10 of your poems? And I wasn't very sure whether that was a hoax mail or was it real or whatever. No? So, and then I read through it again, and there was Sudeep Sen's name. And I asked him, he said, yeah, send. You know, so then I forgot about it because at that time I was working in the Town Development Council, so my head was somewhere else. And then I think I suddenly woke up and said, I better pull out everything and send everything. So I pulled out those 10 poems and I sent, and I forgot about it. And almost, I think 2 years later, there was a mail saying 8 of your poems have been selected. And that was like a Yahoo moment, right? So, but finally it was when the anthology came out, because this was a special anthology commemorating the 75th year. And in the 75th year of Indian independence, all the living poets writing in English. So I find it a pretty magnificent, just by the looks of it. I don't have the hardcover. Let's see the hardcover. It has this, have a look at it. And this is something, you can keep it by your bedside, as somebody has said. Open it from time to time and read a different poem. And there's different worlds in there to discover, different depths to go into, different perspectives to open into. And about anthologies, I saw in Sudeep's introduction, I'll just read out from there. So he says that anthologies serve as a perfect repository and vehicle to highlight and showcase the best in the literature of their own times. They capture the pulse of the culture and provide valuable material for future generations to explore. So I think that is at the heart of this anthology. And each one introduces themselves?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
the
format for the evening is each one introduces themselves. They read for 8 minutes, and I always insist that they read one poem by someone who's not on stage, any other poet from the book, so that we also celebrate their presence in our absence. It's very important as part of community building. And we all say a little bit about the anthology, and then we'll have happy to take questions and so on. And within ourselves, we'll ask each other questions.
All right. Actually, I have to wear my glasses. Okay, about myself. So I live in Auroville. I've been here for the last 44 years, something like that. Auroville has changed a lot in those years. Many things have happened, and I've also gone through many things. Poetry has been the most natural language with which to, I would say, the first language with which to think, with which to gain perspective on anything that was happening around you. So even though I was doing the most mundane work, like working in the Matri Mandir construction site, or working in a food distribution unit, or teaching, or eventually dance and choreography, poetry was the mainstay all through. So here are a couple of them. I'll just read through. So this one is called New Maps, and this was one day I was in Pondicherry, and we were stuck. It's not traffic jam like in Bombay or in Calcutta or Delhi, but it was a traffic jam. There's that canal road, and I was stuck, and there was this huge, all the cars and buses, horn, the horns were blaring. And suddenly I looked across at the tree, and there was a kingfisher. And as though there was nothing else in the world, he was just, one-pointed, totally still. So that poem came out of that. So this is called New Maps. No one knows why this road never stops. At noon, when the sun burns your feet, there is a water lily somewhere, dozing with the frogs. When the road changes, it happens without warning, like a kingfisher striking through the water, shaking up the frogs. The world roars through you, full klaxon. The kingfisher sits still. This one is called The Fall. I would say it's a bit idealistic, but it's perhaps a poem of hope. When shadows fall from your face, hummingbirds sing outside. When doubt falls away from your mind, beavers sleep together in deep moonlight. When darkness leaves your eyes at last, deer walk the streets in quiet trot. When hate dies exhausted in your blood, Gods walk together like comrades in the park. When fear finally sleeps and runs through your heart, your breath is like a river carrying the sun. So this was one. I don't know how much time I have. Okay, so this one is called, this is a long one. This was actually a COVID time poem. This one was written during COVID. Sometimes I open the window and the dusk rain touches my face. A lightness on the edges of knowing that when this frozen summer fails, children locked without knowledge of tomorrow's light will leap as the sun breaks, molten through the corridors, night fleeing rapidly from their eyes, while mothers and fathers hurtling with the hurricane will struggle to stand still, struggle to let go of the darkness. But some, biding their time under the sun, watching the world turn, will make no bid to run. A sudden glory etching in their eyes, a vast unspoken territory easing through their hearts, free from the labyrinthine servitude of death, free at last to sing, to conquer the dungeon silence. So two more, one slightly medium and one small one. This one is called Mobile Hour. I think it's always mobile hour in the world. We're going through another mobile hour right now, right? Do not tempt me with your darkness, night. The stars will all betray you. A tempest rolls in the waves of destiny. The hour is mobile. As the human and the one meet in equal disguise. The reverb of an eternal need sifts the soul between stark infinities. This mobile hour is the dance that knows why the world is music. Serene improvisations refract to find in time's deep calamity sudden beauty, fluttering out from washing lines, from traffic signs, till the irrelevance of knowledge is complete. The soul light steps the night wind as the fixed grid drops a stitch, negotiating between gunfire and power, its free and deep sovereignty. Last one was actually almost my first poem, and I'm very fond of it because Jayant Mahapatra published it, the first poem which got published. So this is called Fire. It's very small. Cast these dreams into the fire, watch them burn, then rise, not toward resurrection, but such perfection death cannot touch. So I'll read now from Arundhati Subramaniam, whom we had invited. She couldn't come, she has promised for next year, but nevertheless, I think I'll just read one from her. So this one says, the world takes a breath. The world takes a breath, noisily, recycling anodyne text messages about the wisdom of looking within. Photographs of mute anguish to give us our daily fix of indignation. A wild pandemic of pieties. Who would have thought an empty hour was so much labor? We walk the day most times on steel girders of habit, knowing that as long as there are lists, the world is safe. And meaning won't save us, never has. But rhythms will. And only sometimes does all the fumbling and twitching civil into immaculate choreography. And the sky falls away like blue laughter And suddenly we are cycling, hands-free, on air.
Should I?
So we'll probably break up. I think it's a good idea to break up each
Yeah.
poet by just some conversation as well. Anthology making is a bitch. It's the worst thing you can ever do. It allows you to make really deep friendships, by which I mean anyone you leave out is a permanent enemy in the Indian landscape. Only in India this seems to happen. I don't know why. People ought to be a bit mature about inclusion and non-inclusion, especially once they reach 25 onwards. So this particular anthology is set up in reverse chronological order. We got 15,000 pages worth of poetry that was submitted in. I had a wonderful editorial assistant, and the way I usually read for books such as these, so she essentially gave me the typed text because we asked everyone to send a soft copy, so we had it in, so everything was sent to me in Times Roman 12 point without the names, with a code. So in fact, I didn't know who I was reading. Of course, some poets I would recognize because their poems I've been following for decades. Then I realized I left out some very, very major people as well. They just didn't cut it. Also, it had to be new poems, unpublished poems largely. I did make an exception for a few older poets who may have not written. So it starts with Jayanto Mohapatra, who lives in Tinkonia, Bagicha, and Katok. Because we had so many submissions, I had to take some difficult, critical decisions about how to cut the thing down. It's already 700 pages as it stands. It would have been a 1,200-page book, which is way too unwieldy. So I said, okay, let me just concentrate on the living poets, because people like Dom Moraes, Arun Koladkar, and Shiv K. Kumar and all that are very well established, and they won't be missed, and they can be easily accessed in all the other anthologies. So let's start with the living poets. Jayanto Mohapatra is 98. He still runs probably India's finest poetry journal called Chandrabhag, which is the name of an extinct river in Orissa. He is the only Indian poet who I think is published in the New Yorker 3 times over, and so on and so forth. So great, great man, incredibly humble. So he kicks off the book. The last poet in the book is 40 or 45 years younger to Jayanto Mohapatra. And she's just, I remember I met her at a residency in Uttarakhand, and she was this bright young thing, and when we were returning from the residency in the Shatabdi, she came and sat next to me and said, I have all this bunch of poems, can you just look at them? So we did a kind of a mobile workshop on the train. And last year she's just published her first book in England by a very good press, and it's just one feels so happy and proud to see people flourishing. The other operative principle was, because I follow, one of my many obsessions is classical Indian music and dance. So the whole idea of Guru Shishya Parampara is very, very important. So I have personally benefited enormously from mentors in my life. And it's usually a one-way street, I think, because as young poets, we can't really give them much, but you gain so much from them. So I think that tradition should really be kept alive. I think Indian poetry is going through a very fraught time at the moment. The last 15 years hasn't been the best in terms of interpersonal relationships. But I remember when we were growing up, certainly Ranjit and I, and some of us. And by the way, we have 4 stars sitting on either side. It's really a real privilege to have these fabulous poets reading tonight. So we had people like, Dom Moraes and the Simadikas. I mean, they were very, very approachable, very kind, willing to look at our work. Not only that, put us up in their homes, give us large amounts of food and libation. And Bombay especially, because there was a big hub. Our generation, well, there are two generations here, I think, or 1.5 generations here. Similarly, had a fairly cordial relationship with each other. But the young generation, I find, are very disconnected with each other. Not only disconnected, but they don't read other people's work. So I find that rather disturbing in many ways. So the whole idea again is to bring the community. The third thing I want to say is look at this anthology as a larger continuum, as part of a larger canvas of three. I've done many books, but three big anthologies. The first one was the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, which came out when HarperCollins commissioned me to, when India's 60th year happened. And then a couple of years ago was the Sahitya Academy anthology of younger Indian poets, and now this one. If you take all these three, you'll have a really good sense of what's happened in Indian poetry, and that would also explain why some people are in some books and some people aren't, because there's no point repeating them unless they have new work. So the entire premise of this book is the Guru Shishya Parampara. Perhaps on that note, we can have the youngest poetry, Chelam Chattaran. Yeah? You want to go later? Who? This is a very civilized lot, man. Pehle aap, pehle
No,
aap.
I'll go later. I'll go later.
Because I have something to say as well.
That will add to.
Okay. Maybe
after someone
Gayatri,
reads-
let's do the Pondi lot first.
Yes, please.
Hello. Yeah. So thank you for having me.
And thank you, Anu, for reading them so beautifully.
Thank you, Anu. So thank you for having me. And I've been living in Pondicherry for the past 8 or 9 years. I conduct the Pondicherry Auroville Poetry Festival every year, and so on and so forth. So I'll begin with a poem by Sarabjit Garcha from this anthology. It's called Unending. It's hard to know how tiny that room must have been. The room in which only one man could lie down on a night the town was dangerously close to being drowned in rain. It isn't hard to know what a knock on the door meant. The door opened and soon there was only enough room for two to sit, the rain writing its unending story outside. Another knock, and there were three standing shoulder to shoulder, faces to the wall facing the street. The story doesn't say anything about a window allowing light in, or a bulb hanging from the roof, or a kerosene lamp fashioned from an ink bottle with a wick thrust through a hole in the top. The story also doesn't say anything about a third knock announcing the arrival of a fourth man. Had there been another seeker, we know what would have happened. The first one to open the door would have stepped outside, letting the other two sleep standing up, letting the last guest cross the threshold and enter the new room that the other two had just built with eyes shut, a room so white that the whole town slept under its roof, the rain writing its unending story outside. Thank you.
Read Sarabjit also, apart from being a poet, a fine poet, is a translator, an editor and a publisher. And he publishes under the imprint, his publishing house is called the Copper Coin. And he started off with a bang. He published the collected poems of John Berger. Amazing way to start, you know. And he runs a very tightly run ship, which is very good for Indian poetry, because I think for the longest time I used to say the literary presses which publish poetry are the backbone of Indian poetry, but I've changed my mind since. There are too many literary presses who are publishing too much poetry, unedited, untutored, and way too much. So I think it's very bad for Indian poetry. But Coppercoin does very few books and very well produced books. And I think he's also doing things like backlists. So he's done Manohar Shetty's many of his backlists of the OUP books that are not around now and his new work. Adil Jaswala, I think he published. So So
He's published mine as well.
He's published
The
yours as well. Okay.
The
there
Dream
we are,
Pod.
yeah. Which I'm
the
yet
new
to
book.
read. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'll just go on to my poem. I think I'll read a couple from the anthology. The first one is called Bodhanath, Kathmandu. I get caught in mantras and prayer wheels, unaware of the complexity of this game, stepping in and out of no time, circumnavigating the endless whirling of leaf takings, arriving in this fairground. Okay, so I decide to play, and in no time I'm shocked, recognizing there are no rules to follow, no definitive formula or entitlement. Motionless becomes sky, brine. Tangas depict green and white taras, elephant, monkey, hare, partridge, mitbin. Vietnamese eatery, 4.99 boda, butter lambs, cafe latte, blue, red, white prayer flags whisper, Om Mani Padme Hum. Children chase pigeons. In Bodhanath, aging, breathless women of Tibet cross mountain space, turning the planet around, grandchildren warming their afternoon laps. So the second part of this is, with valid creases on foreheads, red bandanas holding their long hair, mountain men of Tibet from Mustang, Nawal circumambulate the stupa. Some carry wooden stringed sarangis for the after hours. Women in their traditional chuba carry babies on their backs who squint, occasionally smile, recognizing how wheeling mantras spinning are easiest ways to reach atop the 13 steps. Wearing leather boots, malas, and piety, the old sometimes rest on wooden benches, greet old friends, share a joke, pop a cough drop, quickly rejoining chakras of lives and galaxies. With earnestness and sheer doggedness, they gain merits with every labored step, every out-of-breath death, every twinkle of the eye on bitter cold January afternoons of Kathmandu. They are not here to escape or think of warmer zones to holiday or retire. Escape, they have done that before. The stupa is theirs of the perpetual fire rising, the still point of love. This then is their preferred holiday destination. Now here, there are no sermons on hills, no chapbooks for the little read. Who else should we blame for the everyday miracles of our flawless lives?
Lovely.
So that was from the anthology. Can I move on to some recent?
Stick to the book. Nope,
Maybe
nope,
one.
nope. No. Sorry. Okay.
This is more of a pondy thing that
Since
I
we
wanted
know
to.
each other so well from so far, they misuse their power of friendship.
This poem
Go ahead.
is called Shilpi, Who Saw and Sang, and it was published in January in a magazine called Renaissance, run by Dr. Belu Mehra, whom I don't see here. Anyway, Shilpi, Who Saw and Sang. There was no mistaking the name distinct in Sindhu red, Shilpi Niketan, as his voice crescendoed with bhakti and sank with sweet rasas of those swaras. The tabla's rhythm stringing divinity with moments upon moments of inner cognizance. The audience cramming his silence sat dutiful, enraptured, the air conditioning their hearts now warmer. The Shilpi's life organized neath his measured gait, blue camlin ink on decades-old, now written pages, torn edged covers of yellow notebooks, things absent, not visible to the eye, inched closer around him, and not at a very great distance sat lamps in corners resting in their own sepia chit. The stillness mixed with the descent palpable to all, mostly to those who could be absent. His voice now tremored with gratitude and total surrender, his expanding heart opening floodgates to those who invariably return, bearing fruits, of course, of loss, grief, hurt, pain, partings, and other many hues he knows as love. His breath quickened as he took a while to locate the next song, investigating pages and lifetimes, half anxious, certain it was there somewhere, here. The harmonium shifted ebonies and whites, sobbing with despair, delight in tune with a childhood catchy folk song lifting to space, light. The basement teared up, flooding green and maroon cushions, someone's silver hair and sockless fables, some books lining shelves incredibly named, growing within, living within, and pain, the hammer of God. In the timelessness of half remembrance and total disillusion, the tiny room sloughed to cosmic thalas, lost, not intent on ever finding its way back. So I think Sudeep is going to be really upset if I read it.
I never get upset.
But, okay. So,
I never get upset.
I'll read one call which some of you may recognize. It's called An Afternoon at Tasmai, which is an art gallery in Pondy.
Yeah, nice one.
So this came out of a workshop that was conducted and in 2019. An Afternoon at Tasmai. Old art stacked behind a glass door, Gaia, a patch of green wind and stone Christ, Tamil, hip-hop. My body sinks as my consciousness births indiscriminately patterned shells, blue butterflies, beginning of a river song, terracotta Ganesha in the yellow light. I become stone again, not yet chipped to a certain shape, feasting on narratives. The release is imminent. On every wall, blue lotuses, dark Krishnas playing the flute, stilling the drumming of my heart. Goldfish swims and shadows tower, swaying to the waxing of a moon. Somewhere in the far corner of my sleep, Rumi still tangos with the stars. So, do we have some time, or can I end it with another poem? I don't know. Is there a timekeeper or something? I'll end it with another poem. Okay. So this one is called My Little Magpie Robin, and it was published in Sri Aurobindo's Action Messages Journal, edited by Manju Bonke. So these poems, the later poems, come out of my life in Pondicherry and Auroville, actually. So I thought maybe I should share them with you. My Little Magpie Robin. That time, many moons ago, and I cannot remember exactly when, I wanted so much to flower. There wasn't any particular color or fragrance I had in mind. Anyway, it was so many moons ago and I can't remember when. But I arrived a tad late and no one brought me a flower dress which fit. Saying nothing, I sat on the hurting side of the fence, no tears welling, and the mother whispered, "Wait. The little magpie robin will take with her light patterns to your end of days. Her sweet cries will pierce your pain, and remember, you would have flowered again." My palm, petling pink petals, dead wood, sloughing memories of tall trees, and of a bud's uncertain ascent from your silly heart's callousness and deep philosophies, striving to sky, sea, and unblue sun mix with aromas of coffee and fresh mint. Little green fish, yellow dragonflies, dark halves of moons, ship horns, Mars' light brown eyes. And your little magpie robin remains nonchalant, ripping apart precious things, battle cries, starry eyes welling, castaways, with her relentless whistling. Then I thought I heard, "Nothing here is left behind, nothing taken." And behind the sun's shadow, when she darts around my breeze and salt-rimmed emptiness, your pink will raise its head above the torn silences, the heavy sighs of days, when you become the song again your little magpie robin sings. Thank you so much again for having me. Special and Sudip, of course, and my fellow poets. Thank you.
Can you have the book, please? Since Sudha already drew the Auroville boundaries and put the non-Aurovillians on one side of the stage and the privileged lot on one side, we shall follow that scansion and go along this way rather than picking and choosing. So, the sign graph shouldn't be altered and disturbed. So I'll read a few poems from the book itself. These are poems I wrote while, in fact, I was putting the anthology together. They're all from this book called Anthropocene, which is on climate change, the pandemic, and I call it consolation as well, because 60% of the book is about light and positivity. This one from Anthropocene is called Disembodied. And it's set in my home city of Delhi. And Delhi, as you know, is incredibly polluted, and especially in the winter months, it gets it becomes impossible to breathe, especially for asthmatics like me. But as I travel around the world and go to other big cities, this poem could easily be mapped onto Dhaka or Rio de Janeiro or London or New York, because the climatic conditions we face are not very dissimilar. Disembodied. My body carved from abandoned bricks of a ruined temple, from minaret shards of an old mosque, from slate remnants of a medieval church apse, from soil tilled by my ancestors. My bones don't fit together correctly as they should. The searing ultraviolet light from aurora borealis patches and etch corrects my orientation. Magnetic pulses prove potent. My flesh sculpted from the fruits of the tropics, blood from coconut water, skin colored by brown bark of Indian teak, my lungs fueled by Delhi's insidious toxic air, echo asthmatic sounds, a new vinyl dub remix. Our universe where radiation germinates from human follies, where contamination persists from mistrust, where pleasures of sex are merely a sport, where everything is ambition, everything is desire, everything is nothing, nothing and everything. White light everywhere, but no one can recognize its hue. No one knows that there is color in it, all possible colors. Body worshipped not for its blessing, but its contour, artificial shape shaped by Nautilus, skin moistened by L'Oreal and not by season's first rains, skeleton strength not shaped by earthquakes or slow molded by fearless forest fires. Ice caps are rapidly melting, too fast to arrest glacial slide. In the near future, there will be no water left, or too much water that is undrinkable, excess water that will drown us all. Disembodied floats, afloat like Noah's Ark. No GPS, no pole star navigation, no fossil fuel to burn away, just maps with empty grids and names of places that might exist. Already, there is too much traffic on the road. Unpeopled hollow metal shells without brakes swerve about, directionless, looking for an elusive compass. Thank you. The next poem is called Language, and I choose to read this specifically because of the context of where we are. We are at a LitFest. All of us, our basic tool is language, without which we can't fly or be good seafarers. But it's also about the politics of language. You can have a person sitting in Russia and influence the election results in America. You have people who are PhDs in fake news and cancel culture. You have the social media where we have lost the beautiful art of writing and have pixelated emojis propping up. So that's one side of the story. But the real reason why I wrote the poem is because it is an homage to my first manual typewriter. It still sits on my desk. It's shiny, pristine, well used. But the problem, of course, is ironic that to get it going, to source the black and silk ribbon is more difficult to get the typewriter going. Language, and it has an epigraph from Italo Calvino, and I quote, "Without translation, I would be limited to the borders of my own country. The translator is my most important ally. My typewriter is multilingual, its keys mysteriously calibrating my bipolar forked tongue. Black, red silk ribbons, pools unwind as the carriage moves right to left. In cursive hand, I write from left to right. My tongue was born promiscuous, speaking in many languages. My heart spoke another, my head yet another, the translation seamless. Auricles, ventricles pump blood. Corpuscle-like alphabets, phrases, syntax cross-fertilize my text, breathing life. Texture enriched, music, cadence spatially enhanced, osmotic, polyglottal, a polygamy of grammar. Letterforms dance, ligatures pirouette, ascenders, descenders, pitch perfect. Imagination isn't caged in speech. Speech cannot be caged in language. I read a very short poem. It's a poem called That Is, I.E. And it's for my son, who's older than me. His name is Arya, A-R-I-A. And sometimes I tend to send my poems to my partner or my son, and partner is more accommodating. But my son, so anyway, he sends me typically a text back saying, Baba, it's rather beautiful, in a very English way. He lives in London, so he's got a posh English accent. So I said, oh wow, that's brilliant, Then he also adds that I have no idea what you're talking about. But to me, and this when it happened, to me that was good enough, because for a young person, his aesthetic pulses were stoked. The cerebral part can come later. The fact that he even got the aesthetic paradigm or what he saw the architecture on the page was more than thrilling for me. The other odd thing that happened was Anthropocene was launched during the pandemic, so all the launches were on little mosaic of square screens aspect ratio of 16:9 or 4:3. Um, Depending on your resolution, often they wouldn't even see us. Um, and there was this lady who I would see often come on to different programs of mine. A millennial would say that she was stalking me. I'm more generous. I think she was just hopefully interested in my poetry. And she dropped me an email saying, I bought a copy of Anthropocene, I like it, and is it okay if I turn them into some songs? So what do you say? Of course you can, you're thrilled. So she has since taken 12 of the poems from Anthropocene and made them into an album called That Is, which is why I'm reading this poem. And it's available on iTunes and Apple Music. It came out as a lovely album. I haven't been met her yet. Hopefully at some point. And I realized later that she is a rather well-known singer and a composer. And her husband is a sound engineer, so they have a studio, so it was quite easy for them to do it, I suppose. That is for Aria. That is because you hear the sound of a lone rustling leaf. You hear the sea. That is because I consider the sea silent. You hear its silence in my studio. That is, and because of that, the silence will not empty the sea of its leaves. And I'll end my set with a poem called Om, a Ceremony, a poem that's got me into a lot of trouble with the current regime, to the point that I'm trolled and so on. And interestingly, the Indian edition of Anthropocene doesn't carry this poem because the publishers. So it's in my UK and US edition. Unfortunately, since this came out in the UK, it is in this particular book. This was written at a time during the pandemic when my city was, people were dying. There were pyres all over the street, sidewalks, bodies burning, and so on. I've never seen a horrific time in my entire life. I'm really privileged to have grown up in independent India and haven't seen that kind of horror. What I hear about the partition is only stories from my grandparents and movies and novels. And this is the first time I saw something, bodies being burnt on the street, parking lots, and so on. And what was happening at that time? The central part of Delhi, which is Lachan's Delhi, the beautiful part of Delhi with, millions of years of, trees, old trees. They were all being ripped up, and Disneyland was being built. There are 3 lines in this poem which belong to one of our best Indian poets in English, Agha Shahid Ali. I've put them in italics. I'm not going to flag them when I'm reading it. And that's all I can say, yes. Om, a ceremony. An architecture of frozen music, and that's an epigraph from Goethe. In my city, I'm surrounded by constant cries of the dying, burning pyres heaving under burden of smoke, wood, and bones, wailing summed up by the sonic notes of Om. Civilization's first sound, Sanskrit syllable echoing a conch shell's harmonic mapping, its involute spiral geometry holding within and emanating airborne sonar screams. My ancestors, grandmothers, mother, blew into the smooth shell cupped in their palms, held intimately as if it were a talisman, a prayer, a pranayam in yoga's daily ritual. But breathing is such a privilege these days. Pandemic struck, oxygen deprived, my friends perish, the country buckles airless. Even an exquisite cerement lacks the sheen or wax to wrap the contours of a corpse now. Each day as I write endless condolence notes, etching dirge-like couplets on gravestones, my city continues to be dug up, not to make space for burial sites, but for palaces of illusion, an architecture of frozen music, greed, calumny. A country without a government, a country without a post office, Shahid laments. Let me cry out in that void, say it as I can, I write on that void. Om celebration now, an unceasing requiem. Yet we chant in hope for peace. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you. And the poet from the book I choose to read, who's not here, is Jayanta Mahapatra. He's the eldest. It was a toss-up between Adil Jasawala or Jayanta Mahapatra. Since Ranjit is representing Bombay, I leave, though he's not going to be reading Adil. Let me just read one poem by Jayanta Mahapatra. And this is called Dawn in Puri. Endless crow noises, a skull in the holy sands tilts its empty country towards hunger. White-clad widowed women pass the centers of their lives, are waiting to enter the great temple. Their austere eyes stare like those caught in a net, hanging by the dawn's shining strands of faith. The frail early light catches ruined leprous shells leaning against one another, a mass of crouched faces without names, and suddenly breaks out of my hide into the smoky blaze of a sullen, solitary pyre that fills my aging mother. Her last wish to be cremated here, twisting uncertainly like light on the shifting sands. Thank you. Yeah.
It's on, yeah. I'm going to begin with a one-line poem, a form technically known as a monostage, and it goes like this. Anu, how are we doing for time? So what I'm going to do is to read, 4 of the poems that were unpublished when I sent them into Shrudeep for the Anthology have since appeared in this new book of mine, which is called Icelight. And it's been published by Wesleyan University Press in the US and by Penguin here, and I thought I might just read those particular poems. I'm going to begin with one called Eclipse. You waited all night for the eclipse. A panther loped down to the lake and swallowed the moon. Another night, you thought the wind had called for truce. The moon never crossed the laterite border. A third night, searching in this field where the sky had rained stars, you found the moon, buried in a furrow that a yoked bull had measured in loops from left to right to left, turning and returning. Speak, lunatic angel, which was the right way? Was I implement or impediment? All night the eclipse waited for you. This one's called Sentence. This sentence of rushing water swirls around the silent hill where I first met snow. Let me take you by the hand, she said. Let me show you where rock meets melt, how May's spasms get December's skulls to break into flour, and currents swell, feeding the dry field where I fill fossil fern with stolen sap. This field is where I thaw into a thread and sew these stacked pages of crystal and coal, written over by scorch and snap, these signatures that you turn believing they were willed to you, blank, waiting for your script to spell itself with detonator and backhoe. This one's called Peshachi, which might need a little bit of explanation. It's a poem dedicated to the memory of Muhammad Subhan Bhagat, who was a great practitioner of a Kashmiri folk tradition, a robust form of folk theatre called the Bharn Preth, which managed to bring in everyday matters, political commentary, biting criticism into stories technically placed in a fantasy nowhere land. But Muhammad Subhan Bhagat was one of the many people silenced during the first and terrible wave of violence in the valley in the 1990s. Some of you will know that Kashmir has suffered enormous violence for decades from the state with its extreme military repression, from militant groups who have been brutal in what they've done, and through low-intensity warfare practiced for a long time from elsewhere. To me, Bhagat is the voice of robust articulation. And when the militants broke his instrument and forced him to confine himself to his house, he literally died of silence. And the title of the poem comes from linguistic history. Peshachi is the name given to a language supposedly descended from Sanskrit, but in which there's not a single known text. Everybody agrees that a text called the Brihat Katha, the great story by Gunadhe, was written in this language, but there is not a single version of it. All you have is a supposed translation by Somadev called the Katha Sarit Sagar, the ocean of the river of stories. So some of that comes into this. Peshachi was also the name given to a supposed Proto-Kashmiri by George Grayson, who was amazing, bless his soul, father of Indian linguistics and the Indian Linguistic Survey, but he got it notably wrong in this case. But it works for me because it literally means the language of ghosts, and you'll see why I use that in this poem. Peshachi, in memoriam, Muhammad Subhan Bhagat. Who's there? I ask. Unknown hands have rifled through my notes. Not me, says the lamplighter. I can't read the language of ghosts. Pausing in their lullabies, the village women tell me no one's home. They've gone to hunt or be hunted, wearing the iron shrouds of ghosts. I could try and find them, who should fear them the most. They whisper in foreign accents, trained in the tactics of ghosts. Our grandfather sits alone around his fire, deer, bears, wolves. Listen as he sings into the dark, doing the treble voices of ghosts. They'll need more fur, more teeth, more claws to act on his boasts. He calls up battle, flight, and death, the circular memories of ghosts. In gusts, bursts, and torrents, Gunadhya's stories will flood the ocean. He chants in a forgotten tongue, growling the vowels of ghosts. His words sound like nothing that guests have ever spoken to hosts. This is the language of my people, the language of living ghosts.
session. Tomorrow we'll be talking more about this book.
I'll read that from the anthology. Let's see.
While he's searching for his poems, I have to say that many of us go back a long way, and Ranjit and I published our very first debut volume on the same day in 1991. His was called The Zones of Assault. Mine was a terrible book called The Lunar Visitations. It's so callow, I vomit when I read it. Some good poems, but mostly.
But people are still referring to the lunar
I
visitations.
know.
You can't escape that.
They're so kind. But we are very different poets, as you can see. Tomorrow we have a session together, so do come. But now I feel in our mature age, there are lots of confluences, lovely, beautiful, understated confluences.
There are. And in honor of that publishing generation, you were speaking earlier of generations, Shruti, but I think that, for what it's worth, I think we're among the youngest in that publishing generation, some of whom were 10 years older than us. But I think in terms of publishing generations, because that really forms much more of a history in terms of what one shares. And in that spirit, I'm going to read a poem by Tabish Khair, who now for a long time has lived in Denmark. But his first book was also alongside ours in that early Rupa and Company series. And this poem by Tabish is called My Tongue-Tied Muse in Manners Holds Her Still. And it goes like this. My tongue is tied, we kept your folk curfew. To others' praise of you we added more. And now we're trekking home as asked to do, with almost no cash or food in store. I silently fear we'll surely be dead if this coronavirus thing us spares. With no employment, we will starve instead. I turn around to see how my wife fares. She bears our youngest daughter on her back. We cannot rest or stop, that much we know. I carry all our possessions in a sack. We have about 600 miles to go. On balconies, the middle classes stand, and from a safe distance, give us a hand.
As you might have suspected, these are all modern sonnets. They are, versions of all the Shakespearean sonnets. He did a whole sequence and published a book and donated his entire royalties for an NGO. But talking about the publishing time, we actually had proper poetry editors. So our editor was the curator, and the editor who picked our manuscripts was Nissim Ezekiel. He was looking after the poetry list at Rupa. And at the same time, 1990, 91, 92, Dom Moraes was looking after the Penguin Viking poetry series, and he published people like C.P. Surendran and Jeet Thayil, Vijay Nambisan, all of us part of the same generation. So it was an amazing, amazing space to be edited by them. And I have to say one more thing about the anthology. I'm very ruthless when it comes to work. So I've edited a lot of the poems, and many of the poems have been very kind enough to take my feedback, because that's the only way the poems lift. I'm very grateful to my copy editors and editors who do a wonderful job. So finally we have Jeelam, the youngest, on the stage.
Hello, good evening everyone. Don't look so sad, please smile. Are you all good? How are you? Good? Yeah, you're with me? Yeah? Nobody's talking. I'm standing between you and your dinner. I know there's a lot of pressure on me. So please, I'll try to make it quick and enjoyable for you. Before I begin, I would like to say a few words about Converse. Dylan Thomas once said that the world is never the same once a good poem has been added to it. And Converse, I believe, has added a lot of priceless poems to Indian literature in English. And you might be wondering, what is the role of an anthology and what is the need to celebrate an anthology? It's after all poetry. But the point is, it's not just an anthology, it is a narration of the nation. It upholds the nation's diversity, culture, ethnicity. Over the years, we've started with Jayanta Mahapatra, and you have a young poet, and you can see how the nation has grown and how English has grown on our tongue. The evolution of English writing through poetry. And I also believe that, it upholds the idea of community, which Shudipta was talking, and he's very upset with our generation, and he thinks that we don't come together. Well, not all of us are like that, but we'll try to be better and we'll work on that. Because, poetry is such a small thing at the end of the day. You have to pay your bills, you have to go to work, right? To the larger world, poetry does not matter unless you are in love, or your heart breaks, or someone you love has died. But trust me, if you read this book, you will see so many people have established a relationship with language through poetry. And I believe you can establish the most authentic relationship with yourself and language through poetry. And this book is, if you read the diverse poems by poets from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, you will see how language evolves, how idea evolves. Poetry is almost like science. Poetry is like mathematics here. So please do pick it up. And if you're interested in linguistics, you could see the evolution of language, how the traditions of language has evolved. Like many people tell that now poets, they write like American poets, right? They copy them, Ada Lehman, or some of the popular American poets. I'm forgetting the names right now, or Insta poets, right? See how beautifully language is changing, and you can capture this in this book. Actually, I was talking to Shudip then. I said we can make a chart. We can actually, make a table, and we can see the graphs of the language, where it has gone. So I'll have to read my poetry, and I think you are waiting for my poetry after all. So I'll be very boastful of myself. And
may I just add that Jilam also happens to be a very fine academic, which is where she's coming from, and one of the few academics I know who actually actively teaches poetry and researches contemporary poetry.
Thank you, Shudipta. Yes, I do. I love to write poetry. I love to write about poetry as well. And, I see poetry as a beautiful tool to write about language, culture, ethnicity, and I use this technique of autoethnography. So if you are a student of cultural studies or literature, autoethnography is a technique where you use your personal experiences to understand the broader cultural experiences that are happening around you. It's basically a research technique, but I've tried to use it in poetry as well. So I will read my poem, Sari, for you. And this has been published at multiple places. This has been also nominated for an American Poetry Award, the Nina Riggs Poetry Award 2023. And my professor friend is here, who personally requested me to read this poem because she is including it in her syllabus as well at NIT, I believe. So here, this poem is for you. And everyone wearing a sari. For you, madam. Sari. 6 yards of soft wetness soak the forenoon sun. Cotton expands in powder blue, filigreed edges in faux gold, puff like sails in sea wind, a voyage into endurance. My mother's sari is a scripture, a flag carrying countries of household truths. She in bed with children. She scrubbing the mossy bathroom walls. She in the kitchen smashing a cockroach to its end. There's love and violence that only the pleats of the sari can tell. Now, so much depends on the bee-loud brilliance of the sari, drifting in fragrant droplets into the air, claiming its share of radiance from farmers, weavers, and men. Their curious figurines melting into a fabric, ripe with moisture and a million perforations. Thank you. Are you scared of lizards? How many of you are scared of lizards? 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'm not scared of lizards. In fact, they inspired me to write a poem on lizards. And when I wrote it, I thought, how weird of me. I might be the most strangest person on this planet. Okay, how can a lizard inspire me? But then I was thinking of Frida Kahlo, and she said something that, in this whole world, there are thousands and billions of people. There has to be someone who's like me. There has to be someone who's as strange as me, who's thinking about me. And I found someone in this book, Converse. Well, it's not a she, it's he, and it's a very far-fetched comparison. It's a very he's a senior poet, Manohar Shetty. Yes.
Yes.
So
The whole sequence of
very
insects.
far-fetched similarity, farther than I think metaphysical poetry by John Donne even. But I thought that was a way I could connect. And I would like to read this poem, Lizard, by Manohar Shetty. So please see lizards in a different way next time. They might inspire you,
But if you if you say the same word in Bangla, it's more friendly. It's called tik-tiki.
Yes. Why is it called tik-tiki, you know that? Because when you say something and the tik-tiki does tik-tik-tik-tik, so, and it becomes true.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll say you'll create a sequel to Converse and the tik-tiki will go tik-tik-tik.
No more anthologies. No.
All right. So here is Lizard by Manohar Shetty. Tense, wizened, wrinkled neck twisting, she clears the air of small aberrations with a snapping tongue, with a long tongue. That's all. And here's my poem, Lizard. There's so much to learn from lizards. Their monk-like focus on the spider weaving its home, on the fly aimlessly inspecting the air. One swift leap and a live meal is expelled into a spread of white crystals. Strange things. Dinosaurian demons on their soft backs, shades of beige born to hunt and chuckle at man's greatness, mythic meditative creatures of urban heat. They purify things we dread, fall into wet sinks, remain trapped for days between hinges, and then, like a pianist, exit the world politely, leaving nothing but stories of a lifetime on a parted tale. Thank you. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much.
We are happy to take a couple of questions from any of us. You don't have to focus on me. Yeah. Come on, don't be so
Yeah.
shy. Yes.
Any observation, anything?
Yes. Do you want to take a mic? Yeah. Yeah.
You can use the hand mic.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that while you were reading your poem about a lizard, a little lizard or gecko, I don't know what, is that a tick-tick?
Tick-ticky.
Yes, it's a tick-ticking.
It came out here and it's really adoring your writing.
Also, maybe it resonates with me. Great observation, Karen.
What's the question?
It's an observation,
No, I'm just-
yes.
Did you pay it to be part of the?
I did. It's actually my lover. It's just disguised as a lizard up there.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Any observation, comments, anything at all? I teach, so I always have this tendency to push people to say something. But yeah. Shall we release the book?
Ranjit, you want to
Yeah.
say something about the book or just generally, because you haven't yet?
I think it was last year that Simi, Shudip's partner, asked me in the context of another festival how I managed to be friends with all manner of poets, to which I answered the following. I said, that's simple. I don't edit anthologies. which now appears.
It's in the introduction without naming him.
Yeah. However, that is not the whole truth. For my sins, I did edit an anthology a long time ago for Viking. It was literally the beginning of the century. But I've seen over the years how the anthology has changed, particularly for Anglophone poetry in India. It's changed from a kind of canon-making enterprise, which was supposed to be selective and set some kind of bar of excellence, if you will. It's gone from that to being far more generous and capacious in its understanding of the diversity of poetic practice. It's opened up to poets from many different locations, political positions, linguistic situations, people with hybrid practices. And to me, this anthology, Converse, really embodies those values of the new kind of anthology, which I think is in many ways far more productive and generative than the older kind of canon-making kind of anthology. Because I think canons have a certain use in some phases of our literary and cultural history, but they can also become weapons of exclusion. And I welcome this anthology for its capaciousness and its generosity, and yet without giving up on a certain precision of what constitutes value from an editorial point of view. It's a book that one goes back to and discovers new voices. It's polyphonic, and yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the things I want to just also highlight about the anthology is normally, anthologies have maybe, say, 2 or 3 poems per poet. So you don't really get a sense of their writing. Here, the minimum number is probably 7 or 8, and the maximum is 15. So that's a lot of poetry by each poet. You should be able to get a good sense of their artistic practice and their linguistic spectrum. Also, anthologies never give space for long poems. Long poems are a very important subgenre within poetry. So here I've reprinted Adil Jasawala's Chakravyuh, which has never been printed properly. It was commissioned, I think, by Channel 4 as for Mani Ratnam.
Ratan Thiams.
The Ratan Thiams, yeah. So that entire poem is there. Then I was completely bowled over by this poet. I mean, a lot of people, just send me books generally, and so beautiful surprises come through the door. And there was this beautiful, beautifully made book, handmade paper, letterpress, and it's about a fable of a fish, and it goes on for many pages. And I said, this is a brilliant book, and someone called Tanya Mendonca, who's a senior poet, many years senior to us. So I told her that, is it possible to reprint the whole poem? She said, really? You are going to do that? But the problem was, because of the lineation and the architecture of the poem, the way each page was carrying the weight of the word and the line lengths and the cadences, to then strip it and recalibrate it on a sort of a longer page was problematic. So I had to insert a icon or linguistics, maybe a dot or whatever I used there, because there were no ellipses or punctuations. So yeah, it has many. There's Rukmani Bharna's long poem, which will probably come out as a book. It's a book-length poem. And some of the greatest poets of the world have written book-length poems. Well, you have Sri Aurobindo, who's written Savitri. I mean, that's quite something. Well, chapter-wise, but yeah. You have, and you have, say, Derek Walcott, Omeros, which he won the Nobel Prize. It's a book-length poem, which is a take on creolized, francophone take on Homer's Odyssey. He also wrote another brilliant long poem called The Teopoler's Hound, which is a conversation of 2 poets. And then my God, not oh my God, but my God. If I have to ask, when people ask me who are your favorite poets, it's a difficult question. So I said, okay, gold medal, easy, Milton. If one person takes 12 books to just get the paradise, to lose the paradise, and then he needs another 4 to regain it, and it's a sustained piece of metrical verse full of lust and love and people dying and so on. It's a great tale. So Milton would be my favorite. So, these long poems are very important because they are also part of our oral history. Don't forget the first forms of literature was poetry. And rhyme was introduced in poetry because it aids memory, repetition, memory. So poems like Beowulf and so on were all passed down orally. So I thought it was very important to revive that and put it in a book. Can you just say that again, please?
There's a session on future poetry. This is a treatise on poetry, poetic theory, which would be very interesting for. And anyway, the book is there. So what struck me when you were reading that is that you had this very sustained cadence, and that sustained the power of the word, let's say, and so. There you go.
When is the session?
That's on Sunday morning.
Oh, I'll be there.
And Gautam Ghoshal is going to be moderating that.
Oh, what time? Tomorrow morning we have a session too.
No.
It's not clashing, I guess.
Is it?
Eki.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think many of the poems people read, if you hear very closely. By the way, I edit with my ear, not with my eye. It's very important to get the tonality. Yeah, why don't you say something? Because I think you had a beautiful question in the morning. Do tell us who you are for the rest of the people. Doesn't like to follow? Who are you?
Why I liked it very much, because the entire rhythm is created by questions. And as Longinus has said, questions create sublime. And if it comes spontaneously, as it has come to you, that is why I shouted excellent. Because it goes with Sri Aurobindo's theory of poetry. I am Gautam Ghoshal from Shantiniketan, and I am here as a member of the governing board, and I will moderate a session on Sri Aurobindo's theory of poetry and Savitri.
And he had a wonderful intervention in the morning about prosody, which is lovely because it's another aspect of poetry which gets
Yes,
left
that
out.
is because when Sri Aurobindo is using run-on lines, it is called in tika in Sanskrit expository.
Yes.
And when he is suddenly catching something like let me refer to a line from Savitri. A touch can alter the fixed front of fate. A sudden turn can come, a road appear. So when he speaks wisdom style, he uses the end stopped.
Yeah.
And when he wants to elaborate, he uses
Run on.
run on. And also, what the speakers couldn't explain, that is, Sri Aurobindo is not just Indian. Sri Aurobindo is plenty of Western. And Gokak has explained in his book, Sri Aurobindo, the Seer and Poet, there is a chapter, Allusive Style. Sri Aurobindo is all the time having the memory of Keats when he is using a certain line. All the time the memory of Milton. And but his theme, his substance is totally different. But he is reminding us, as Eliot says, the historical sense. So,
also Hopkins actually, because the way he turns the line and rhymes in the middle of the line,
yes.
the run-on.
And Dr. Hartz said it nicely, because he fell between two.
Not now. Interesting. Yeah, George Curtis has. Yeah, he'll be.
Why don't you speak?
Anybody else has? Yes, please.
Madam has a question.
Please, yes. And please introduce yourself.
You're a professor, so you don't need a mic. You
Okay.
can do without a mic, yeah.
Please
No,
introduce yourself.
I'm Sarani, and I teach applied linguistics, values, and ethics at NIT Goa. So I am here to discuss Sri Aurobindo's poetics, and that was my research topic as well, poetry and poetics of Walt Whitman and Sri Aurobindo. Now I would like to, Sudeep has nicely pointed out that he edits with ears. Yes, Sri Aurobindo also said that in the context of quantitative poetry, he said that ear is the best judge. So you just read it out and listen. So ear is the best judge, and we should actually edit it with ears, not by reading them. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, but it's also interesting when you think of the ear and its positionality. It's like a fulcrum on a rod.
Exactly.
Because the other two things are weighted. Our cerebral space and our heart are influenced. They are more emotive. They're more knowledge can lead us in certain direction, and heart leads us in another direction. The ear is very truthful.
Exactly.
It sits in the middle and says, listen.
Also, it's a skill one acquires over the years.
It's a skill one acquires over the
You can
years.
do it
Yeah.
confidently.
I have to say that I give full credit to my grandparents and my mothers. I remember as a young child in the puja ghar, when my parents used to chant the prayers, we sat there with an agenda because we'll get the prasad and the sweets. You know, we had no idea what was going on. But much, much later in my first book, which was published in 1990, I wrote a poem called Durga Pujo. The entire narrative of Durga Puja in a short space. But technically, I used the couplet form from Chondipat. The same metrical couplets and the cadences, because I've heard it all my life, and somewhere through osmosis it sort of embeds in you and it sings.
I'm actually going to discuss this sound value, sense value, and how do they culminate into soul value tomorrow.
You must also pick up contemporary poetry in English and do that, because it's not been done.
I wanted to make a confession at the dinner table to you particularly. And the second thing is that Ruskin Bond once mentioned that poetry doesn't sell. So now the notion is changed, poetry has taken center stage, and Jhilam's poem, actually one day I was browsing internet and suddenly I saw the poem, and she's my friend's friend, Anita's friend. So Anita is also a poet. The moment I started listening, it reminded me of my mother, because I don't stay with my family. And I just remembered the smell of my mother's worn-out sari, because that embodies the narrative of suffering, daily suffering, that kitchen, then housekeeping and all these things. And I have to read Ranjit's translation of Lal Din, that I have to, because I have done a project under UGC on female mystics. So this, your translation will be my addition.
Also, you may want to read Arundhati Subramaniam's contribution on
I will.
female mystics.
And the mistake I made, I can make a confession. I'm a very straightforward person. I have a collaborator, Gautam Karmakar. Both of us have worked on urban literature, and we also worked on gender sensitization. That time I was looking for critiques on anthropological pollution and all, because my researcher is working on Amitav Ghosh. Okay. Suddenly he said, there's a critic, Sudeep. And that's why on that day I said that, are you a critic? I'm so sorry.
I'm not a critic, but I'm a reader of poetry. Yeah. I mean, I critique a lot of poetry too.
Now, answering Sudeep's question on how Sri Aurobindo's aesthetics can be related to the recent poets, and the most vehemently anti-Aurobindonian poet was Nissim Ezekiel. He said, anyone who thinks highly of Sri Aurobindo as a poet has no ear for the English language. And the Bombay lobby has, of course, they are not in line with Sri Aurobindo's poetry. But surprisingly, no, Mehrotra is deadly against Sri Aurobindo. And it is in print. But surprisingly, Ezekiel has a line in Marriage which is exactly in harmony with Sri Aurobindo's theory of poetry.
It's a homage to him.
And it comes from the infinite and disappears into the infinite, Sri Aurobindo says. to Setna. Now, Ezekiel has a line which struck me because I keep in touch with recent poetry. Ezekiel writes, he's writing about a couple, they are walking. Wordless, they walk like a breeze. Wonderful. So, and Setna once said to me that Lal is a better person, but Ezekiel is a better poet.
Yeah. But really, thank you so much for being such
I
an
think,
engaged audience.
Not to interrupt.